We see it on lots of DEXA scans that we do for patients. They have loss of lean mass, they have higher visceral fat, metabolic slowdown. It's a combination of low dietary protein and lack of training stimulus. That's not aging. We're seeing preventable muscle loss because people are following this outdated nutrition advice from an era when protein. Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the MD Longevity Lab podcast, where we are playing the long game. I'm Dr. Nisha Patel, physician, mom of three, and self-proclaimed recovering carb addict.
Wait, recovering?
I mean, yeah, I still like carbs.
Same. Okay, I am Dr. Vikas Patel, ER doc, husband, and a guy totally getting paid by the protein lobby. Kidding, obviously.
Well, we get asked so many questions about protein. How much protein do I need? Do I need shakes? Is animal protein bad? Do I have to count everything? So today we're going to try and cut through all the noise and break down what protein actually does, why the old ADA guidelines are very outdated, and how to optimize your intake without feeling like it's a full-time job.
All right, so let's get started with the basics. Why protein is a real longevity macro. I think it'd probably be useful for us to talk first about what macro ingredients there actually are in our diets. And so most people, I think, are familiar with the big three macros. That is fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Over the years, society has gone through a bunch of phases of villainizing carbs, then villainizing fats. But really, it's just a flawed approach. We need all three of these macronutrients working together for optimal health and longevity. And today we're going to cover protein. Protein isn't just about muscle. It is a building block really for so many different things. Everything in our body, from hormones to neurotransmitters, immune cells, enzymes, even really the lining of our gut. And this is kind of where it gets interesting. Your muscle mass is actually considered a key biomarker for longevity. The Health ABC study and an NHANES data study have both shown that people with higher lean muscle mass live longer and have lower risk from falls, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even dementia.
Exactly. I like to think of muscle as your metabolic reserve tank. It's really what helps your body handle stress, whether that's an infection, surgery, or aging. So when you lose muscle, you are losing resilience. There was a JAMA open network study in 2021 that showed that lower muscle mass predicted higher mortality, even after that was adjusted for BMI, body mass index. In a 2025 meta-analysis of 11 different studies on lean muscle mass, there was at least a 30% higher mortality rate in people in the bottom third of lean muscle mass in the population compared to people in the top two-thirds.
Yeah, so when we say that protein is a currency of longevity, we mean it, right? The more muscle you have, the better your metabolism, the lower your inflammation, the more stable your glucose. And it's not just about aesthetics, it's really about health span as an insurance policy.
Exactly. So we've covered this in previous episodes about metabolism, but it's worth reiterating. Muscle is the first place that our body puts sugar in our diet. So the more muscle we have, the more dietary carbohydrates we can eat without impaired glucose tolerance or diabetes. That was my main reason for putting on muscle. Translation, I can have a brownie, I can have that scoop of ice cream.
Or two.
Or two, right. So the lower our glucose is, the lower our triglycerides and the lower our total body inflammation.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the key here, that there is a huge benefit beyond the aesthetics of having a muscular physique. This is where the real longevity component comes from. So, why are the ADA guidelines kind of missing the mark today? We should talk about that magic number, right? 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. That's what the RDA is, or the recommended dietary allowance. And that's really been drilled into medical training and pop culture for decades now. It was based on studies from the 40s and 50s, and it's really the bare minimum of protein to avoid malnutrition in sedentary adults. This is not an appropriate guideline for people who are actually active. For decades now, we've had this data showing that 0.8 grams per kilogram is the floor, not the goal. And there's studies like the Prot Age Study Group in 2013 and Morton et al. In 2018 that showed that older adults, athletes, and anyone under metabolic stress need really closer to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of protein. And then up to 2 grams per kilogram if you're really active or if you're potentially trying to lose weight.
Yeah, you mentioned metabolic stress in one of our previous episodes when we addressed metabolic health. We mentioned that 90% of Americans have poor metabolic health, which means most of us fall in this category of increased protein requirement. So those RDA guidelines are so dated that they basically are saying that a 150-pound adult only needs 50 grams of protein a day. And that's worth noting. That's the minimum amount of protein to basically not die, for your organs to just function. It is not an optimal target for longevity, muscle maintenance, or performance.
Exactly. For most adults, it's really about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. And here's what's wild: many adults over 40 barely hit the zero point 0.8 mark. We see it on lots of DEXA scans that we do for patients. So they have loss of lean mass, they have higher visceral fat, metabolic slowdown. It's a combination of low dietary protein and lack of training stimulus because they're not exercising. And that's not aging, that's under proteining and under movement. We're seeing preventable muscle loss because people are following this outdated nutrition advice from an era when protein protein really just meant like steak and dinner and a glass of milk. Why don't we move into the debate on plant versus animal protein and, kind of parse out the real story here?
Yeah, this is a fun one. So, we're going to address the controversy of animal versus plant protein. Biologically, animal proteins are more complete. They contain all 9 essential amino acids, especially leucine, which triggers muscle protein synthesis. But the debate extends way beyond biology.
I think it's important to note that when we talk about the 9 essential amino acids, there's actually quite a few more amino acids. The 9 essential ones are the ones that we can't synthesize ourselves. So we have to get this through diet. And as Nisha said, animal proteins are complete sources of protein for us, meaning they have all of those 9 that we can't synthesize ourselves.
Yeah, and critics point to climate impact with livestock contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, while others avoid meat for religious or ethical reasons. And there is some middle ground. A climate conscious omnivore approach, which is kind of what we take, we prioritize high quality, sustainably sourced animal protein while trying to balance some plant based options for health, ethics, and the planet. But from a purely biological perspective, animal proteins are more complete, meaning they contain all of those 9 essential amino acids, like you said, that we cannot make those in our own body. We rely on our diet to get those 9 essential amino acids, especially leucine, which triggers that muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah. Uh, we need about 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to activate that anabolic switch or protein muscle building switch. You can hit that typically if you're eating 30 to 40 grams of high quality animal protein or a smart combination of plant proteins. You'll typically get that amount of leucine that you need. You can absolutely thrive on a plant based protein diet. But you honestly, you have to be intentional about it. So that means that we have to make sure that we're combining foods to make up the difference if you don't have a complete protein source from just one plant-based source. So that's why when we start looking culturally at different cultures around the world, you'll see why certain foods are paired together. So lentils with quinoa, beans and rice, tofu with edamame. There's studies like the EPIC Oxford and Frontiers in Nutrition study in 2022 that showed that vegetarians who hit total protein goals and resistance train really maintain very similar muscle mass to people who are omnivores. The problem isn't plant-based diets, it's incomplete ones. You can't live on granola and call it a high protein diet. Whether you eat chicken, tempeh, or tofu, you have to aim for in that range of 30 to 40 grams per meal. Your body doesn't really care what Instagram diet you follow, it just needs the amino acids.
Yeah. So, politics, religion aside, we have patients from all walks of life. And so, we are not trying to convert anyone to eating animal protein if they're a vegetarian. We will do a customized approach if that's what they want to follow.
I think it's kind of important to go over the big picture here on what protein turnover is in our body. Our body is in this continuous state of protein turnover. It breaks down old and damaged proteins and then it remakes them or synthesizes new ones. So, on average, between 250 and 300 grams of protein are broken down and resynthesized every single day for the average adult. And that's about 3 to 4 times the daily dietary protein intake. And the reason is that we're actually recycling a lot of the proteins that we're breaking down. So we don't need that full 300 grams of protein from our diet. We may only need 100 or 150 because we're recycling a big chunk of that. And this is different for kids versus adults. Kids are much more efficient at recycling proteins than adults, and hence their protein requirements are relatively lower than adults. Whole body protein turnover kind of has a timeline within our body. So it's very interesting, but pretty much we turn over all the protein in all of the tissues of our body, including our muscles, about once every 100 days. So specifically in muscle, we're turning over about 1 to 2% of our muscle protein on a daily basis. And if you add that all up over about 3 months or so, we are turning over completely new muscle tissue. It's honestly odd to think that your bicep is not the same bicep that it was 3 months ago.
My bicep isn't the same bicep that it was 3 months ago because I'm now way more jacked than I was.
That's right. Watch out, Ergon. Watch out for Nisha.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about why this matters. So, maintaining muscle mass requires enough amino acids to keep up with this constant turnover that you're talking about. So, with aging, both muscle protein synthesis and the autophagy efficiency decline. And that leads to a net loss of functional proteins if your dietary intake of protein and your resistance training aren't in check. And as Vika said, this is one reason why older adults need way more protein per pound of body weight than younger adults or kids to kind of offset that anabolic resistance and slower synthesis rates. So let's talk about how protein boosts your metabolism and energy. Protein has a super high thermic effect of food. So Vikas, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
The thermic effect of food is really how much it costs us to digest that food. Roughly for protein, if we're eating 100 calories of protein, 25 to 30% of those calories go directly towards the digestion of the protein itself. So the net to your body is only 70, 75 calories, even though you ate 100 calories. If we compare that to carbohydrates, the thermic effect of carbohydrates is 5 or 6%. So you're netting to your body out of that same 100-calorie meal of carbohydrates, you would net 95 calories. The thermic effect of fats are only 1 to 2%. So 100 calories of fat means that we're going to be netting to our body 99 or 98 of those calories.
So basically, in girl math, protein is priceless.
Totally, because you're getting it 25% off.
That's like when I do an Amazon return and I'm like, because I made money today.
Exactly. And we're going to get that money back in our account.
Yep.
So, muscle tissue is metabolically active. It's like a glucose sponge that we mentioned earlier. So, a 2018 cell metabolism study found that higher protein intake preserved insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial function in older adults. When you combine that with resistance training, you essentially build a metabolic engine that burns more at rest, improves glucose control, and helps to maintain a healthy body composition.
Yeah, not to mention satiety, right? That feeling, that fullness feeling. Protein helps regulate hunger hormones like ghrelin and leptin. So patients who have increased protein often find their cravings drop dramatically. So before you try a medication for appetite control, look at your plate. There's often a simpler, more natural fix and adding a little more protein to what you're eating. Let's move on. And this is my favorite part, which is how to hit your protein goal without making it a full time job. And that's where most of us get overwhelmed. We talked about the 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So, how do I hit 120 grams of protein without eating chicken all day? But the good news is it's not that complicated once you understand the structure of how to do it. And trust me, I've been there. There was a time I thought when I was actually fueling my body by cramming down 3 protein bars a day. And I did that only to realize that they were basically carb fat bars with a sprinkle of protein. It wasn't exactly the most efficient strategy to get my protein. So, the moral of the story for that is read your labels, build your meals with purpose, and you do not need to live off a chicken breast to hit your goals.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the label might say 20 grams of protein, but what you have to pay attention to is what's buried in that label, which is how much extra sugar is there in there, how many oils and fillers are there. Marketing today really loves protein because it sells. And that really kind of brings up another question that we get all the time, which is, isn't whey protein powder an ultra processed food? Well, technically, yes, right? So whey protein actually comes from milk, and it is milk that's been ultra processed, and they've removed casein protein and whey protein, which are the two main proteins in milk. So yes, it is actually an ultra processed food. However, all UPFs are not created equal. Whey is what I'd call a functional UPF. It's processed, but it's processed with purpose. It's helping you hit your protein goals. It's not tanking your health like a soda or chips are. It's actually just separating out all the components of milk and just giving you the one thing that you're interested in right now, which is the protein. There may be some additives in it to make it taste better, because whey protein by itself doesn't really taste like much and it's kind of a little bit gross. But if you add in some type of artificial sweetener or even natural sweeteners like honey and a little bit of flavor of cocoa powder or something, then you can make it taste pretty good.
And if you listen to our ultra processed food episode, you already know eliminating UPFs completely is kind of a pipe dream. We still love them as treats, but we also use whey powder on a daily basis, right?
Exactly. It's one of those strategic exceptions. It's a processed food that actually serves your goals. As long as your UPF doesn't have a bunch of fillers in it, it can still be actually really good for you. UPF does not automatically mean it's bad for you. It just means you got to pay attention.
Yeah. And we had mentioned in that episode that most Americans get between 60 and 80% of their diet from ultra processed foods. That is the problem. Your whey protein is not part of the problem. So the goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. You don't need to eat clean 100% of the time. We just want to make sure that the foods that you are eating are moving you closer to your health span goals, not further away.
When it comes to high quality protein sources, animal based options tend to pack the most complete amino acid profiles, as we mentioned, especially leucine, which is a key for muscle protein synthesis. Other than that, let's think about other things that we can really add to our diets easily, right? So, eggs, Greek yogurts or skyr, cottage cheese. all convenient, versatile, and rich in slow digesting proteins like whey and casein, chicken breast, turkey, fish, lean cuts of beef or bison. They all easily deliver 20 to 40 grams of protein per serving and also come along with important micronutrients like iron, zinc, even creatine, which we've talked about that can help to support muscle and metabolic health. For those leaning more towards a plant based diet, there's a lot of great options, right? Lentils, beans, edamame, tofu, tempeh, quinoa, chia seeds, hemp hearts. While most proteins that come from plants are incomplete on their own, combining them, as we mentioned earlier, like rice and beans or hummus and a whole grain pita, can create the full amino acid profile that we need. So there are some exceptions to that, and this is why these things are a little bit more popularized. So soy, quinoa, and pea protein are the exceptions. Those protein sources have all 9 essential amino acids. The only problem with some of those is that they're not as protein dense. So you have to eat a larger quality of those, a larger quantity of those in order to get the same um, amount of amino acids or protein that you might get from animal based sources.
Yeah. And of course, whey or plant based protein powders can fill in the gaps for busy days or higher protein targets. I know when I started tracking, I think I started at about 35 grams a day. That's how much protein I was getting. And that's even less than that crappy RDA recommendation. So I had to incorporate whey protein daily to get to my target. So now on a good day, I'm hitting maybe 120 grams of protein. On a bad day, I'm still at least at an 80, which is higher than when I started.
We've controlled this in our lives, right? We start off every day making a protein and fruit and vegetable smoothie that has about 50 grams of protein in it. That's one technique that we've utilized is that we make that basically as our meal for between breakfast and lunch. And that way we know every day that we're getting at least that 50 grams of protein out of the way before lunchtime. And then we don't have to pay nearly as close attention to what's happening from lunch and beyond because a lot of the other things that we tend to keep around the house already have the amount of protein that we're trying to shoot for.
Yeah, when we're home, we do that about 6 days a week. On vacation, we enjoy ourselves and we're not tracking our protein. So this isn't about perfection. We're not asking you to live on a spreadsheet. But if you're actively training, you have to try and get your protein in within that 24-hour period of exercise. That's really important. There's not much gain in getting your protein within the hour of your exercise, even though that's what's been taught in the past.
Yeah, as long as you're hitting the total protein goal within a 24-hour period, your muscles will repair even if you don't down a protein shake immediately after your workout. Celebrity slash influencer type people will talk about this anabolic window and that you need to get it in within the next 2 hours after your exercise. But that anabolic window, when your body is capable of repairing muscle tissue, it's really the whole next day after you've exercised. It's more about consistency of keeping your protein roughly consistent day in, day out that matters more than anything.
Yeah, that protein window is wider than people think. I always tell patients your protein intake does not have to be perfect, it just has to be deliberate. Don't skip your breakfast, don't rely on a single protein heavy dinner, and don't fear protein powder. It's just a tool.
Exactly. We're not asking you to live on a spreadsheet, right? We're asking you to eat like you respect your future self.
All right, so let's move on to myth busting time. So, we're going to bust a few myths about protein. Myth number one, I love this one. High protein damages your kidneys. So that is completely false. That's been debunked repeatedly. We've heard this from some patients. If I get too much protein, we've heard this from diabetic patients. Like, if I get too much protein, I'm going to damage my kidney.
There's a very small window of people who can have some issues with protein, and there are people who have pretty severe chronic kidney disease, which is less than 1% of the population that is falls into this category.
Yeah, in healthy individuals, there's no evidence that protein intake harms your kidneys. And this has been proven in multiple studies.
Exactly. Myth number two, you can only absorb 30 grams of protein per meal. Also false, right? Your body digests everything that you eat. 30 to 40 gram limit refers to how much maximum stimulation there can be for muscle protein synthesis at one time. So there's this like lower threshold and this upper threshold. And the lower threshold was thought to be, well, until you hit 20 grams of protein, you don't stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And then the upper limit is supposed to be 30 to 40 grams. That doesn't mean that if you eat less than 20 grams, you're not going to put on muscle, or that if you eat more than 40 grams, you're not going to put on muscle. It just means that there's this window where if you were not training at all, and you want just the daily 1 to 2% of muscle turnover that's supposed to happen, when we hit 20 grams of protein in a meal, our body automatically gets the stimulus to start breaking down muscle and laying down new muscle and repairing. And that window is really roughly between that 20 and 40 grams. But all the protein that you eat is going to be utilized in one way or another. You are going to use it. Influencers kind of get in the weeds about the exact timing and the amount. But I think most of us have jobs, families, and longevity is not a full-time job. So it's really seeing the forest through the trees here. Don't get discouraged by some of these experts trying to split hairs.
Myth number three, protein makes you bulky. Please. You are not going to wake up looking like The Rock because you hit your macros. Protein helps you maintain lean muscle mass and look defined, not swollen. If you don't consistently lift weights over the course of years, you are not going to bulk up even if you eat enough protein. You taught me that. I thought when I started lifting weights and hitting 100, 120 grams of protein a day, that I was going to gain weight, be muscly, and look masculine in my clothes. And Vikas was like, don't flatter yourself. You're over 40. You would literally have to be eating 200 grams of protein a day and lifting 5 hours and loading up on steroids, and you still probably wouldn't be bulky. So I have noticed my pant size dropping as I'm eating protein and putting on muscle. My clothes are fitting better. So the proportions look better. That's been very motivating for me, but you are most definitely not going to bulk up.
Bulking up is not something that happens overnight. So it's like at any point, like if you actually ended up loving resistance training and you're hitting these macro goals and you're actually starting to bulk up and you're like aesthetically, I don't want to, you know, go down this path further, you can stop, right? I mean, this is not something that is truly a real world problem. The people who are bulky appreciate that look and they're actively really trying to get there. And it's a lot of hard work. For most of us, this is not an issue. I think most people notice what you notice, which is I put on a few pounds of muscle. I look better, meaning the shape of my body has changed. My weight may not have changed, but I'm stronger. I might have lost a little bit of fat mass and replaced it with muscle mass. So my body weight may not have changed a whole lot, but I look and feel much better.
And that's what happened in my case. I am up on the scale compared to 2 years ago. I am heavier, but I am leaner. I've put on some muscle and I've lost some body fats, and my clothes size has gone down. So the scale, it doesn't tell us the full story.
You look skinnier even though you actually weigh a little bit more. And that's another way of saying that you've lost some body fat percentage. You're actually leaner even though the weight doesn't reflect that.
I know I'll see patients after months and they'll be like, you look so skinny. And I kind of correct them. I'm like, actually, I'm really strong right now. I'm not skinny.
Shira.
Shira, basically. If any of you are as old as we are, you remember He-Man and Shira. Anyway, for some real talk, let's address balance and longevity. Here's the real world perspective. Most people undereat protein and overeat processed foods, carbs, and fats. The result is fatigue, slow recovery, more visceral fat, and declining muscle with age. You do not need to count grams forever. Just build your plate with intention, prioritize a palm-sized portion of protein first, then your veggies, then carbs. If you can get the ratio right most days, you're winning.
Totally. And if you're in your 40s, 50s, or beyond, this matters even more. You are fighting anabolic resistance, your body's decreased ability to build muscle from the same amount of protein. And this is why older adults need more, not less protein.
Exactly. And for women, especially women in perimenopause and women going through menopause, protein is protective for bone density, muscle retention, and metabolic health. Studies like the Framingham osteoporosis study show that higher protein intake preserve bone mass over time. So, whether your goal in perimenopause and menopause is energy, body composition, or longevity, protein is step number one. So, some closing thoughts. If you remembered one thing from today, we want you to take away the Cliff Notes. The RDA is outdated. They basically say for a 150-pound person, you only need 50 grams of protein. That is wrong. You want to aim for 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight and distribute it evenly across the day and combine it with resistance training.
And keep it sustainable. You don't need to be perfect, just consistent. So you can play the long game by making protein part of your daily routine and not your entire identity.
Exactly. Longevity isn't about restriction, it's about fueling your future, and it starts with how you build your plate today.
Nish, I think that's about it for today's episode, right? Protein 101.
Yep. If you found this helpful, share it with a friend who's skipping breakfast and saving calories for dinner. You're not saving anything, you're just starving your muscle.
Yeah, that's true. Follow us on Instagram at MD Longevity Lab. Please leave us a review and text us any of your questions. We certainly might feature them in our next Q&A session.
Yep. Until next time, keep training, keep fueling, and keep playing the long game.
Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.